feels particularly poignant today to sing to children as you go your way in peace. Something I want to sing and to be true for all the children everywhere on earth. Today, we're going to talk about Israel and Palestine. And when I've told people this, they go, uh-oh, be careful. You know, honestly, there are too many things to say. Just too much history, too much violence, too much trauma. So many lives dehumanized and vilified, taken. You know, it's easy with the internet to access all of that oh so readily and not develop any deeper of an understanding. If you find it overwhelming and complicated, messy and imperfect, and I don't mean the way we sometimes talk about our own lives as being messy and imperfect, I mean messy and imperfect in the most terrible of ways. If you're feeling all of that, I am so with you. Everything in our ethical core wants to make sense of what is happening. Perhaps even cry out like Job, asking for some kind of divine verdict, clarifying for all where innocence and guilt lie. Job sits, wrecked and sickened, hoping for an answer, something tidy that never comes. I don't have any answers for you either, but I can propose a beginning. Heartbreak. Heartbreak, I think, is the only place to begin. Let our hearts break open to empathy, open to what our siblings near and far and among us are struggling with when it comes to Israel and Palestine. I mean, have you cried? Because I have. Truly witnessing with, experiencing with these two peoples in heartbreak and horror is a way to be with them in humanity. I invite us to lift up out loud or in the chat or in the sacred silence of our being what has broken our hearts these last few weeks. All the children. It is sacred to name and to recognize and to witness the heartbreak we share here. My heart was ravaged on October 7th with the Hamas terrorist attack. Roughly 1,400 people, children, grandmothers, parents, babes in arms, friends, just brutally and viciously killed. Since then, I've spent an hour scrolling and reading their names aloud, as I've done in past years commemorating those who killed in the Holocaust. Each name read aloud, a life not overlooked or forgotten. But I'll also share, when those stories were coming out, something distracted me from processing the grief and horror of it all. It was knowing that what was to come would be even worse. A level of retaliation that I myself would know it as an act of genocide. An act of genocide against Palestinian civilians, children and families so like my own. This foreboding was like this bike accident I had once where I could see it was coming and I could see no way to avoid it. I knew it was coming as assuredly as I know the trauma of our Jewish people, and as clearly as I know the trauma in my own life, and I have complex PTSD, as well and as perfectly as I know the trauma and violence in our United States. I mean, thousands of people, almost over 3,000 people this year lost in mass gun violence events. The trauma here is real. I knew it as assuredly as this one fellow student in my international poli-sci class the afternoon of September 11th, who said, "We have to bomb them." And I looked at him and said, "Bomb who?" "Whomever," he said with a shrug. And I was aghast, and bomb them we did, and invade, and like 1 million lives lost? Trauma response is so real. But I'll also tell you, this conflict just feels so close. And it is for all the reasons. It isn't actually removed from us at all. A point driven home to us by the 6-year-old boy, the Palestinian refugee, killed by his landlord. And Samantha Rolls, the synagogue president, murdered for being Jewish. It's my friends, people I consider close. I had a seminary classmate from the Jewish Theological Seminary across the street, Rabbi Aaron, the first gay student they had ever enrolled. He got on a plane last week to fly to Israel because one of his family members was taken hostage and another was in the Israeli Defense Forces, and he prayed for peace for the Palestinian people and in grief. And then there's Allah, who is a good friend of mine from Indianapolis, and she and I were part of an interfaith group. We helped organize a conversation around Israel and Palestine during the Hezbollah attacks several years ago. And then there was Layla, who I also had to reach out to and care and support. You know, her mother's whole family is Palestinian and there. And she married a Jew who are part of the Jewish settler community. And she herself does international human rights work, including working for Human Rights Watch in Israel. She went off Facebook. I had to find a work email just to let her know I was thinking about her and her family. What could I do? You know, and it's not even just all the people, right? The people are real, right? But how much of this reminds me of life in the United States and everything that we've experienced? Reminds me of that trauma response to September 11th, used to justify bombs and invasion and torture. How the flyers that people put up showing the faces of their loved ones who are taken hostage by Hamas look so much like the faces of family members who were in the Twin Towers that their beloveds were searching for. I'll tell you, seeing those faces ripped feels like a desecration, a cruel repudiation of just honest grief. You know, the arrival of the Jews in '48 reminds me of how white settlers here from Europe displaced our native people, and how much the state of Gaza these last few years remind me of the Japanese internment camps here during World War II. And also of the Nazi Jewish ghettos that they established. You know, all of this trauma and history just reads me into everything that was happening in really particular ways. I draw on all these collective stories to teach me and inform me, like, what do I think of this and how do I act? You know, I and others who care about civil rights here in the United States, of course, overwhelmingly were pro-Palestinian rights and safety. And that includes deeply people of color and indigenous people, and also the American Jews who were right there in this work for decades. You know, the majority of American Jews, and not a significant number of Jews in Israel, believe that Israel should stop and take back the encroaching settlements, support an independent Palestine, and that Israel should be accountable for its actions, and sometimes even concede the colonial nature of how the state of Israel was formed. That commitment to human rights and mutuality extends all the way up to, but does not include the elimination of the state of Israel, because that would not be mutual or interdependent either. I'm also holding my Jewish UU colleagues in ministry who share in our little Facebook collegial group that really what they wanted was care. Just people to say, I care about you and I'm thinking about you, and a real place to process and dialogue, experience some empathy, only to see other UU colleagues, including a staff person at the UUA, reiterating Hamas slogans envisioning the elimination of Israel. That hurts. That just hurts. It's all just so freaking painful. And I've been sitting with this pain, and I know you guys have too, and just trying to think, what does my faith speak to this? To do some spiritual reflection and find some grounding. And here's what I realized, at least so far. I think this hurts so much because we are interdependent. Because really there is so little that truly divides us. We are people living fragile lives on this planet in relationship with one another. And so it hurts. But also I thought, doesn't interdependence go both ways? If pain and grief comes in, can't care and empathy and love go out? Couldn't we perhaps help change this trauma response by helping de-escalate violence, both small and little, the hurtful words, and also all the armed militarization and response? Maybe we should start by practicing listening and empathy. Do you know, listening and empathy, saying, I hear you and I believe you, lowers the trauma response. It reestablishes a kind of psychological safety, and it helps move people from being reactive to responsive. Maybe empathy is the best start we have. And I truly mean empathy for everyone. It is hard. I just want to say it's hard, given our networks and the people we love. It is just downright hard to have universal empathy. But that is also our faith. The promise that we make to see human worthiness in each person, no matter what they do. The promise to respond with love, presence, and empathy to human ugliness so vile we could call it evil. Our forebearers sometimes struggled with siding with love. They struggled to demonstrate their theology in their own lives and actions. Some asked, and this is true, some asked, can't we punish first and love second? Literally decades of pamphlets and debates on that one. But no. Where they arrived at was that love, presence, and empathy must be the response. And I'll tell you something, they were onto something. Practitioners of restorative justice have seen that a person or a group is much more likely to be accountable for their actions, to move away from harmful and destructive behavior with the three following things: when they are met with empathy, when there are clear boundaries that demonstrate that such destructive behavior will not be tolerated, and when they're given the support to take other, more productive mutual paths. Let's remember that the Israelis and Jews in diaspora and the Palestinians have had generations of trauma. We could at least have empathy on that. When we see trauma, we don't simply say, oh, they're acting out of trauma, and therefore there's nothing else that can be done, or we just have to give them space to do that. No, we can actually have a trauma-informed response. We can recognize that when we look at trauma, and particularly transgenerational trauma, the longer the core of that trauma goes unaddressed, the more embedded it becomes in the DNA and the psyches of generations to come. The longer the cycle of unaccounted for violence goes on, it'll become increasingly difficult to veer off this path that we are on, where everything is on repeat. And actually, it's not just on repeat, it spirals and gets worse. So much of that I've seen these last few weeks is the confirmation of my worst fears. I'm both naive and not naive. This is just not simple. This is long work. And we are wonderful and imperfect humans, and we are going to mess this up so many times in ways that will break our heart. But every time we get it right, it shows us that sometimes the possible wins over the probable. Our job is to work for the possible future, even if the current one looks inevitable. The possible over the probable. For 3,000 years, the Jews were a people without a state. For 75 years, the Palestinians have been the largest and most continuous refugee group on our earth, a people without a state of their own. And yet answering the call of love means believing that it is possible for each of these peoples to have their own nation and for there to be peace between them. The two-state solution could happen, and I think it will only happen if both Israelis and Palestinians know that they are supported and know that they need to be accountable for the harm and destruction that they have caused. Now, we are a democracy here, and we could call on our representatives and on the White House to no longer fund a reign of terror upon Palestinians. And if you do this, I'll just say, be kind to the people answering their call. Your call, many of their hearts are breaking too, and they don't always know how much control or input they can have. We could share with them that there are longer but more effective ways to hold Hamas accountable. We could push our government to be firm about that. The US could be unequivocal about its support for the existence of the state of Israel and be equally unequivocal about the need for an independent and safe Palestinian state. But I'm veering away from our faith and towards the poli-sci lessons of my past. So I want to share just a few last things. We are interdependent. So similar to the story Mira heard from Alfred, her elder, we here as Unitarian Universalists believe that life comes from one source, that we live an interconnected life here, and what lies ahead will reflect both that interdependence and a return to that source. Humanity, all of us, each of us, are part of that oneness. We journey together. So let's act like it in how we treat one another. We wish we could just make things better, but control is just a fallacy. It's a myth. No one has control. But what is most available to us is how we treat one another. So let's show that there's a way we could be here on these shores where we won't let the horrors and even the genocidal intergenerational trauma keep us from affirming each person's worthiness. Let us recognize the possibility of a better future lies upon our claiming interdependence with each other. Peace will come when our needs are met and when tolerance and respect are common. Dear ones, let's find the larger story. It could even be an old story, like the story of Noah and his ark. Did you know that both Muslims and Jews revere Noah? Muslims actually is a prophet. He was the one who helped find, his ark mirrors the travel of the Hajj, and Jews more as a priest. Let's remember how that story goes. It begins with humanity so vile and violent, so destructive, that God did not see a way of turning their hearts and actions around. So he told Noah to gather 2 of every creature, including humans, and put them on an ark. The world was flooded, and so much was lost. But because of the ark, there was a promise of future generations, a promise of a better world for those generations, a promise that life would continue. For 300 days, there was a time of reset, a break from that cycle of violence. And on the 301st day, a dove came back, carrying in its beak an olive branch. Those fatty olives can preserve one through lean times. It is said, though, that because of the care required to grow an olive tree, farmers can't grow them except in times of peace. To grow an olive branch is to extend a willingness for peace. Olive trees grow all over the hills of Israel and Palestine. May it be so, and amen.